Hello YouTube, this is Satsu5 and this is going to be kind of a vlog style video about my opinion on what a force knife for a kid should be. And so this is going to be up to the parent. I am not a parent at the moment, but I often think about this, partly because I get questions about it. I get questions, oh, what would be a good knife to give my kid for their first knife? And it's something that I think about from time to time, and I thought I'd give my opinions on the knives here in front of you. And me personally, I feel that I want my knife, or my my kid's first knife, to be a non-locking blade. Now I have one locking blade on here, but I'll talk about why I have that one on here. But I want it to be a traditional pocket knife, not tactical, no triad locks, and I'll talk about the reason for that here in a little bit. But I want it to be a tool. They can worry about tactical knives when they're in high school, or first few years of college before they become 21. But when they're, and I haven't decided what age I'm going to introduce my kids to knives at. I mean, obviously, they're going to be introduced relatively early so they can learn safety and proper technique and stuff. But the age of the kid or the child is completely up to the parent. I'm thinking somewhere between ages 6 to ages 8, maybe 9. Just start introducing them to knives and stuff. Not letting them necessarily walk around on their own with them at 6. But I'm thinking around 9 or 10, they should be pretty comfortable with a knife. And like I said, I have these knives. In general, they're traditional. And I have one traditional knife on here that I do not recommend whatsoever at all. Never get it for your kid if they're a young kid. But some of these companies, like Victorinox, I think Victorinox has a My First Knife model, and it might just be a toy, I can't remember. But Opinel, which I think is a good choice. They have a children's version of the knife, and it comes with a colored handle with like little carvings on it. And instead of having this very pointy tip on it, they round the tip off, almost like a pin blade. Not quite the pin blade that you'll see on a Victorinox, but slightly more rounded than this. I personally love the pin blade for EDC task over this upswept blade. But they make a special knife for kids. I think it's a little bit bigger than this. I can't remember if it's a 10 or what, but this is a number 8 in carbon steel, and I think this would be an awesome knife for a kid. And if you really want to be the overprotective parent, which is not a bad thing, in moderation, small doses, you can get the rounded off tipped one so they don't actually poke themselves. If they'll, it forces them to use the edge and not the point. If you're stabbing through something and your hand's in the way, you can really mess things up. Now, me personally, I don't recommend getting children's knives and purposely dulling them, because that will make the user put more pressure behind the cut, and if it slips off or does something weird, it can actually end up causing you to cut yourself. We're taught in ag class, for those of you who are in the FFA, took ag shop or whatever, they teach you a sharper tool is a safer tool. The easier it is to cut an item, the less effort you put into cutting the item, the less likely you are to hurt yourself. So Opinels are pretty notorious for not having the best edges, but they have such a thin grind that once you put an edge on them, they're really, really sharp. And the cool thing about Opinels is that you can lock them. Now, they're not the strongest lock, but if you're afraid that the person or your kid that is using the knife, the blade might shut on them, you can just turn the collar and lock it. And for all practical purposes, this is not going to shut on the child's hand. And so Opinel has a special model for kids, and if you don't want to get the special model, I can't remember the price, but you can always buy a number 8 or a number 10 or whatever, and you can round the tip off yourself. It might be cheaper to do it that way because these are not decorated like the children's knives. Let's talk about a knife that you should not get a kid. I mean, if they're like 12 or 13 years old, maybe, but that is the Duke. And this has a very strong spring, reaching around the, let's see, I can't even open it with 2 fingers. There we go. That second to that, to readjust my grip. But this has a very, 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 very strong spring on it, which is a key characteristic of a Duke. You can almost, if you are blind and you're just opening a Duke, you can tell that it's a Duke knife. Spring is extremely strong. It does have a half stop, which is good, but I don't think a kid that I'm introducing to the knife should use a Duke. I would not recommend it. And so that's my opinion on this knife. That's the only reason why I had this knife on the table, is to tell you, if you have problems actuating the spring, your kid is probably going to have problems actuating the spring, or it's a spring on a slip joint. But if you want a slip joint, you got a few different options. We have the Victorinox, and you don't have to get a ALOX model for them. Obviously, you can get like the Spartan or the Tinkerer. You can get one that has the classic red plastic ones. This would be a good Boy Scout knife if they still allowed knives in Boy Scouts. You can pretty much find the model that would benefit you the most. Though obviously are probably not going to need a beer opener, but can opener, all screwdrivers. They even have some with magnifying glasses and stuff, pens. I think the Victorinox is a good boy's knife, is what I normally call these knives, boys' knives. Knives that if I was a teacher in a public school, I wouldn't necessarily be afraid of a kid carrying a Swiss Army knife. They're probably not going to do something stupid with it, in my opinion. If I was in charge of the school system, I'd be like, okay, if you want to carry a knife to school, carry a case, carry a Victorinox, carry a Opinel, and I'll have no issues with that whatsoever, because these are purely tools. They're not weapons. Of course, you can do something stupid with them, but they're not optimized for evil things. They're optimized to be tools, and I think kids can pick up on that when they grab a knife. It's like, hey, this is not Excalibur. This is something that I use to cut up my food or opening up packages and stuff. So I think the Victorinox is a good option. I think cases are a good option, although I'm not a big fan of cases. But this is a relatively cheap trapper, and it's Sterling, and this is relatively easy to open and shut. I'm not a kid, so I can't tell you if a kid can open it or not, but it's relatively easy for me to open. I will say this, my brother's girlfriend is very weak for some health issues that she has, and she has a hard time opening up different knives, and she has a hard time pressing lockbacks. She's just she has no finger and grip strength. So it's not just little kids that might have problems opening knives. Women might have problems opening up some knives. That's part of the reason why I don't have any triad locks or cold steel knives on here, because one, I want to emphasize the tool aspect of the knife, and two, even with a fully grown man like me, before those triad locks break in, sometimes they get stuck in the open position, and it's almost like a fixed blade. You can't shut it, and you have to like almost use two thumbs to press the lock bar just to close it. So I think a case, a Swiss Army knife, would be a good choice when it comes to Swiss Army knife. I am a Victorinox fan. I know Victorinox owns Wingle, and Wingle is not bad, but to me, I'm a Victorinox guy. Now, here was an interesting slip joint that I would say would be a good kid's knife, and that is the UKPK. It's so politically correct that it's even legal in the UK, and they can open this knife up with one hand, depending on their size. It's a slip joint. It does have a half stop, but the spring is relatively weak, so it's very easy to open and shut. See if I can. Yeah, I can do it with my pinky. Couldn't even do this one with my thumb and forefinger, but can open this one up with my pinky. And there's another version of the UKPK. It's not a UKPK, but the small is significantly smaller, and it's to keep it from being a one-handed opening knife. It's like from Denmark or something. That would be a good option as well. But this would be a good first knife, in my opinion. A little bit more pricey than most of your Saks, Opinels, and stuff. And I think, you know, when it comes to getting a kid a knife, no need in getting them a Sospensa or a Benchmade or something like that. They're probably going to do something stupid with it, like prying with it, and you know, you don't need to buy them a really expensive knife. So this is probably going to be a little bit on the higher end. So I would probably stick with Opinel, Sack, or Case. But let's talk about the Higo Nagami knife. I personally like the Higo Nagami. These I mean, they're not expensive, but they cost significantly more than the Opinel. And to me, the problem with the Higo Nagami, you know, is in general a two-handed opening knife. You can definitely open it one-handed, but a kid probably doesn't have the hand size to, you know, manipulate it with one hand. But it's a good EDC blade shape. It needs to be sharpened when you get it in the mail. Most of these knives come dull in the mail. They're really cheap, traditional knives. But the problem is with the Higo Nagamis, by the way, I think this is the cheapest one I have, and it's the bigger one, and this is the more expensive one, is that they get relatively expensive for what they are. And if you're buying it online, there's certain things that are unknown, and that is the blade retention in the handle. And you know, like I said, I shake this one, and it's kind of shaking out, but in general, it's relatively safe. It retains. But this one, I shake it, and I barely shake it, and it comes out. And although I feel comfortable carrying this, just because I'm a little bit experienced in knives, obviously, and I kind of know how to put this in my pocket. But you know, you probably don't want a knife that's gonna fall open when you shake it when you buy your kid a knife. So I like the Higo Nagami. I think the Higo Nagami would work as a kid's knife if you can pick out the one that's not going to fall out on you. If you can handle it in a store, if there's a store that carries it, you know, I would say handle it, find one that retains relatively well, and get that one for your kid. But like I said, these, especially this one, gets a little bit high up there in price. I guess while we're talking about it, we can talk about the sword. They make smaller versions of this knife. I personally don't care for it. It's not the best cutter. It doesn't really do any kind of cutting task extremely well, in my opinion. It gets razor sharp and it will cut. I cigar cutted my pinky. I don't know if you can see that. I was closing it one-handed and my pinky was in the way, and I chopped the tip of my pinky off like a cigar. That was operator error, you know. If I would have been paying attention, that wouldn't have happened. But that's just my little video on knives for kids. If I had to go from best to worst, well, let me talk about this one first. This is the only locking knife that I have in this list, and the spring is relatively tough, so that's a potential issue. But it's two-handed opening, and it has a great blade shape. This one's probably going to be better for an older kid. But yeah, if I had to rate from best to worst, first kids knife, I'd say Opinel, Victorinox, Case, UKPK, and then the Higo. This, I'd say these would be for a little bit older kid. And I don't get mad at me if your kid does something stupid with them. This is just me talking and saying how I foresee myself parenting as a parent and introducing kids to knives. I might give them a Opinel like a 6, but they're probably going to be only using it when I'm around. When they're like 8 to the 10-year-old age, I might let them carry it around with them on a day-to-day basis, like camping, or I might let them keep it on their person. But that's it. I'm going to stop rambling now. So thank you for watching. I'm a Satsu5, and I'm out.